Welcome to the Blake Talks Good podcast. I'm your host, Blake Jennings, founder and president of OnRamp, a nonprofit that has donated reliable vehicles to hundreds of families in need to help them on the road to self-sufficiency. This podcast is designed to help you maximize the good that you do in your community, whether you're an individual or part of a charity, church, or other organization. In this episode, I want to answer a bit of a strange question. I was a teaching pastor for 17 years in a local church, so I preached a lot of sermons, and this podcast isn't about preaching, it isn't about sermons, but this will be relevant. You'll see why. I want to answer the question, what was the worst sermon I ever preached? In other words, like, what sermon do I most regret having preached? There are a few that I really wish I could go back and do differently, but there's one in particular that, at least as of today, I would say is the one I regret the most. And so I want to tell you which one it was and why, and then connect it to the point of this podcast, which is helping you maximize the good you do in the world. So let's get right to it. What was the sermon that I regret the most? It was a sermon on James chapter 2, starting in verse 14. For those of you who have wrestled with the Bible, this is one that you may have come across. It is a common controversial passage, because it asks the question, what use is faith if it has no works? James goes on to say that faith without works is dead. And so for those who are Christians, the basic idea of our religion is that you are saved or you are right with God based on grace, based on his gift given to us through Jesus, not based on like works that we do, on keeping some list, on rules that we follow. So you don't earn your relationship with God. It's a free gift. That's the basic idea. But then here comes James, and he tells us faith without works is dead. And what use is faith if it has no works? And so that's a tricky passage. It's caused a lot of people a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, trying to figure out what's going on. And there's multiple views on it. I'd say there's probably 3 or 4 primary interpretive answers to that passage, ways to understand it and fit it into the rest of Christianity. And when I preached that passage, that must have been 12, 13, 14 years ago now, I put a lot of work into studying the views that were available and into the actual Greek that James wrote, really understanding the words and the way they were put together, understanding the flow of the argument. I studied it for hours and hours and hours. I wrote a paper on it, actually. And then I got up and I preached this sermon. It was like 45 minutes. And I felt like the sermon was awesome. I'm going to be honest. I try to be a humble person, but sometimes I'm kind of arrogant. And I felt like, man, I nailed it. I explained our interpretation of that so well that no one would be left wondering, why do we hold our view? Everyone would see that these other views that were out there in the evangelical church were wrong. Our view is right. I felt like I had nailed it. I felt so happy about that sermon that I had given. And so I gave it on a Sunday and I went home, felt good about it. Woke up Monday, came to church feeling good. How great I did. And then I had a conversation with a fellow pastor who's a friend of mine, who's now, interestingly, on my board of directors for OnRamp because I so respect him. I didn't on that day. That day I didn't like him at all because he came up to me in the copy room and we're talking about the sermon and I'm like, yeah, I feel like I got this together. It went well. And we're talking about how I prove that our vision, our understanding of what James means when he says faith without works is dead and how it relates to what Paul said about salvation being by faith alone. He asked me the question, well, Blake, do you think that the audience, the congregation, will do anything different this week? Do you think that they will actually do the good works that the whole passage was about? James mentioned in the passage, what if a brother or sister comes to your door and they knock on your door and they are hungry? They are in need of clothing. They're in need of basic, essential charity to survive. Do you think a congregation is going to do anything different if someone knocks on their door? I was devastated. That was like the worst copy room meeting ever. It was like such a humbling moment. Because I look back at the sermon, I realized it was like 45 minutes, probably 41 minutes was exegesis. It was all the proof of why my view was right, of why our church was right and these other churches were wrong. It's all this good defense. I mean, I got into the Greek, I got into the logic of the argument and all the homiletics and blah, blah, blah. And I spent maybe 4 minutes bringing it home about like what you should do. And it was that was like really weak because I was out of time. I was so out of time. I couldn't get to application. I had to really get into the exegesis, into the theology of it all. I was really humbled and convicted in that moment because I realized how much I'd blown it. Because I realized that, you know what James wanted, and through James, what God wanted was that we would actually give a rip about people in need in our community. That when they come and knock on our door, we would do something about it. That we would seek out those who are hungry and don't have sufficient clothing and shelter and the things that they need in life, and that we would meet their needs and that we would sacrifice. That's what James wanted. And I was convicted by the fact that I cared more about being right than doing right. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason I regret that sermon. I would argue it is probably one of the top 5 problems with the evangelical church in the United States today. I don't think it's a very controversial take. Most pastors I know would agree. We fall into this trap, especially in like evangelical world, Bible church world, of caring more about being right than doing right. I fell prey to this. I blew it here. I'm not talking to any other pastors or about any other. This is me. This was my fault. I cared more in that moment about being right than doing right. And I sadly, I think that we do this all the time. I think this is something that is true not just in church world. It's true in our society at large. I see this very often in the political sphere. So that now we're outside of just churches where it's prevalent. It's prevalent in society as a whole. I find so many people on both the political left and the political right care more about being right than doing right. They care more about winning the argument, winning the day, than actually doing good for people in need in their community. I saw this recently. I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but we recently went through a government shutdown where food stamps were paused. And there was all this vitriol and argument and debating online and in person about food stamps in the program. What is it good? Is it bad? And you saw very polarized views on the left and on the right about this program of food stamps. And what I felt in that moment is there is so much energy being expended on a debate that is at most of secondary importance. I'll be honest, like the debate about food stamps is of secondary importance to actually feeding the hungry. That's what matters most. And what I walked away with from that was the same thing I felt from James 2 is we are so caught up in proving that we are right that we miss the obvious application. It's like right there in front of us. Go read James 2, 14 to 26. He could not make it more clear. Do good for those in need, period. Period. Go help the people who are starving, who need clothing, who need shelter, who need a good job. Help them. Give advice. Meet that need. That was the obvious application. I missed it because I was so caught up in being right about my view. Same thing with food stamps. So caught up in being right about our political view that we don't actually go out and find out who in my community is suffering, who right now doesn't have food on their table. How can I meet that need? That is the first importance. Winning the view, sharing your view, talking about your view, that's of secondary importance. Now, again, I want to be clear, whether it's debating and discussing the theology of James 2 or discussing the food stamps program and whether it's working or not, those are not unimportant conversations. Those are important to have. I hope you're talking about meaningful things like that and thinking deeply about it and reading research on it and discussing it. That's important, but it is less important than doing the good thing. And that's really my point. That's what we miss in the evangelical church. And it's what we miss in our culture in general, is that we get so caught up in being right that we miss the obvious opportunity to go do right, to do the good thing. So that's a sermon I regret greatly. Let's talk now kind of the application. What do we do with this? Well, one of the things that's been fascinating to me to see over the last 10 years since my eyes have really been open to my error and to the opportunity to do good through OnRamp and in other charitable and ministry-based efforts, what I've come to see, which is actually really exciting, this is really good news, is that when you bring people's focus off of the debate they're trying to win and move their focus to the need that's in front of them, the person who is hungry, the person who needs a vehicle and doesn't have it, the person who needs shelter and doesn't have it, the person who's here in our community or a person who they hear about in this other place who needs tangible help. I frequently see people who are from opposite positions of whatever the debate is work together. I can see our donor lists for OnRamp, like who gives sacrificially, and I will promise there are very liberal Democrats and very conservative Republicans on our donor list giving to the same cause. Because even though they have very different political views, they come together around the much more important issue of there is a person in need in our community and you can meet that need, and that rallies them around that. I see the same thing in church world. I see people who have very different views of James chapter 2. I have friends who are Roman Catholic. I have friends who are Protestant, Bible Church, Baptist, Methodist, a variety of different Christian religions out there who all, despite having differences about James 2 and how you're supposed to interpret it, when you bring them somebody in their community who is starving, they will pitch in and help. And that's beautiful to me. I love when I see that. I think it's too often missed because we're not looking for the people in need. We're so caught up in our insular debates. But when our focus is taken off those debates and onto the particular specific need in front of us, I see so many people step up. And I would argue in our religious tradition, you're acting like Jesus at that moment. You are being like him. You are sacrificing to meet this tangible need for somebody who's vulnerable and in need in front of you. And that's really beautiful to me. And in this most recent crisis, when food stamps were paused, I saw two really cool examples. I saw the church that I used to be at put together a ministry to go actually give food, like emergency food assistance right now. Like, not let's plan this out, I'll put 6 months of strategy, but like right now, let's go. And I love that. That's so beautiful. I saw the same thing for some partnerships of some nonprofit organizations who, in general, I would say they probably lean left a little bit more. They immediately convened together and were figuring out the details of how do we put a program in place to meet this. We're going to be lacking food stamp assistance in our community. How do we meet that need quickly, efficiently, and effectively for as long as the government shutdown goes on? That's beautiful. I love that. In both cases, you have groups saying, you know what, despite what our differences might be about the particulars of the food stamp program, whether you should have it or not, or how you should implement it, blah, 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 we're going to set that aside for the moment, and we're going to meet the needs of people who are hungry right here in our hometown. That's beautiful. That's not that's not missing the forest for the trees. That's keeping the plot. That's keeping focused on what matters, which is doing the right thing, doing good for those in need. So I would encourage you, wherever you find yourself, whether it's in some religious debate, cultural debate, political debate, family debate, whatever it is, please take a breath every so often and step back and ask yourself, am I missing what really matters here? Am I more interested in being right than doing right? When I'm around my family and we have different political views and everything's getting tense, is there a moment to stop and help everyone focus on what really matters right here in our town and our community and our family needs that we can practically meet that are of more importance than winning the debate between these two positions? I would encourage you to look for those opportunities. I would encourage you to be a person. I think this is one of the aspects of being a peacemaker in your town, in your church, in your family, in your country, is that you step back from the debate, whether it's a theological, biblical debate or a cultural debate or political debate, whatever it might be. You step back from that and you draw people's attention to, I know we have differences of opinion here. Those are important to discuss. That's worthy of discussion, but let's not get so caught up in that and in the heat of that we forget that there's a tangible need. There are people, communities, towns, an incredible need right in front of us right here, and we can unite around that need and do this good thing, meet this need together, even if we disagree about these secondary things. And ultimately, all those debates, they're all secondary of importance to actually doing the good thing for someone in need who desperately needs your help. So I would encourage you, don't lose the plot. Do what James is actually saying in James 2. Help the person who is lacking food or clothing or shelter. Meet their needs. Worry less about proving yourself right and worry more about doing right in your community for those in need. This has been another episode of Blake Talks Good. I'm your host, Blake Jennings. I look forward to our talk next time. If you have a question that you would like covered on Blake Talks Good, you can email it to blakej@onramptx.org. Again, that's BLAKEJ@ONRAMPTX.org. We'd love to have your questions, whether they're about individually doing good or working at a nonprofit or ministering in a church, wherever you might be. If you want to maximize the good that you do in your community and have a question, please send it to us.